Welcome to the Sweet Arts of Fighting. James DeLacy here, taking you through another breakdown. I had a few requests in the comments on previous videos. One of them was to break down Phil Daru's videos. Now, he's got a shit ton of videos, so I kind of just picked one out. I know he did a whole series on bare knuckle boxing, training for that, so I thought I'd just jump into one of those videos. This is nothing against Phil Daru or any of his fighters. He's had great success with a bunch of fighters. I know some of our training philosophies differ slightly. Obviously, he's had great success, so this is not saying his methods are wrong or anything like that. There's very rarely a wrong way to do things, but I think it will be good for me to kind of explain how my philosophies slightly differ. It gives you more perspectives as well, a kind of more well-rounded training view into how things can be done, because there's multiple ways of doing things. So this is just more of an explanation of various training methodologies. So this is a max effort workout. So I know Phil has a huge, what would you call it? A lot of his strength conditioning is underpinned, or huge influence from Westside Barbell. If you're not familiar with Westside Barbell, it came from geared powerlifting, not geared in terms of doping, even though there was doping, but geared in terms of the style of powerlifting. So powerlifting, you have raw powerlifting, which is without the suits. And then you have geared powerlifting, which is usually wearing something like a squat suit or a deadlift suit or a bench shirt that assists you with the lifts. The technique becomes different. And obviously Louis Simmons championed that with geared powerlifting and that philosophy, which was this idea around max effort lifting, dynamic effort lifting, and repetition effort lifting. So I don't have the sound on for this one because I got copyrighted in the last video. So I've just got the words coming up. So I think this is... Wait, yes, okay. So maximal effort sumo deadlifts, defining out as 1 rep max, then working to some accessories and some volume to build max strength. Okay, yeah, that's pretty simple. So if you're unfamiliar with the max effort portion of Westside, you're essentially working up typically to a heavy single. You can do heavy 3s and 5s, etc. But you're working up to a heavy weight for whatever that lift is for that day. Now, a traditional Westside powerlifting program will rotate the lifts, and it's very rarely going to be the competition lift in powerlifting. So your competition lift in powerlifting will be a sumo deadlift or a conventional deadlift. Typically, they'll do max effort day for a deadlift. It might be a squat variation, or it might be like a deadlift variation. Could even be good mornings, all that kind of stuff. Something that's completely different, and they kind of rotate those week to week. I'm not a huge fan of that. I know many people aren't a huge fan of that either. Obviously, I'm not sure how Phil does it. I think he kind of just takes the principle. I don't think it's about rotating lifts. It's more about just lifting heavy weight as part of a max effort day. So he's doing max effort sumo deadlifts for this. I'm not a huge fan of the sumo deadlift for athletes. I think the stance is too wide just to really have... I'm not going to say it's not going to be beneficial at all, because lifting heavy stuff regardless is probably going to help. You're probably going to strengthen some of that adductors on the inside of your leg. I just don't feel like it's a good movement for athletes to use. When you just have other options, you can use various squat variations, closer stance, deadlift variations, where you're going to produce force in stances that are, I'm not going to say more similar to the sport, but just with the feet closer together, where it's kind of like your power position. That's not to say there's no use in a sumo deadlift. It's just I prefer typically not to use it unless you're a powerlifter. I don't think it gives you any benefits over, for example, a conventional deadlift or a trap bar deadlift, if that makes sense. I still think if you're going to do a deadlift, a trap bar deadlift is the best option you can use. Mainly because, one, it takes some of the stress off the lower back, and if you look at some of that research on trap bar deadlifting, you can typically lift it faster than a conventional deadlift with the barbell. Now, he's just using a deadlift bar here, so if you're not familiar, deadlift bar is longer and it has more flex, so you can lift more weight with it because the bar flexes further before the plates even come off the floor. So it looks like he's going straight for a 1. So I think this is where a lot of our philosophies differ too, around kind of maximal effort strength training. Very rarely, I mean, this could be just a test to potentially program the rest of his training off for the rest of the training cycle. I don't know, so I'm just making a lot of inferences from this, but typically I will not go to a 1RM lift, regardless of what time of year it is, or even really a 1RM, or even like a strength test in that regard. Maybe to like an easy one where it's not so much of a grind, and use that as like a training max. But going to a true 1RM as a combat athlete, I don't think has any value. It doesn't have any value, in my opinion, in the programming. It doesn't have any value in developing strength, because obviously we don't go into 1RMs to develop strength. Developing strength is just accumulating reps at relatively high intensities. And when you're doing 1RMs, you put yourself in a lot of fatigue for the following day's training, or during that day's training if you're training twice a day, as an example. And I think the risk of injury obviously goes up with that. So even when I was working in professional sport, we wouldn't do 1RM tests. I'd literally just at the end of a training cycle, it would be programmed in to go, up to some kind of heavy 3, not like weights you have to psych up for and you're gonna fail, just like nice, easy, fast 3, and then that's what you can use the program from. And it means all your reps are always fast, and you're not grinding things. And that's like long-term strength gain. Okay, so it's just more sumo deadlifts. We don't need to worry about that. What comes after? Okay, now he's just doing some reps, I think, afterwards. Yeah, just some back offsets. So back offsets are nice. So this is one concept I do like. So you can do what is called, it's called many things. An overset is probably the best way to describe it. So for example, if you had, I don't know, 3 sets of 5 deadlifts at 70% 1RM or something that day, you could, as part of your warm-ups, you can lift up to say 80 or 90% for a single, and then you come back down and do your 3 sets of 5 at your 70%. The weight feels lighter, it moves faster. It's like a potentiation concept around that. So that's something you can do as well. If you're just doing traditional straight sets, do say 1 or 2 oversets, just working up to like, I wouldn't call it a daily max, but just something heavy-ish that you can literally do, regardless of how you feel, and then come back down. So that's a nice concept you can take from this as well. So we got some more sumo deadlifts. That's a lot of deadlifts though. I probably wouldn't do that many deadlifts if you have technical training later that day.
Alright, pull the elbows together.
So now they're moving on to,
once this happens, it's gonna fall forward.
It looks like front squats. Yeah, so it's gonna be, yep, front squats. So sumo deadlifts and front squats. It's a pretty nice pairing. It's I really do like the front squat. I've talked about this in previous videos as well, how much I prefer the front squat over other squat variations. It is more, it is different enough from the sumo deadlift. However, he's doing front squat for reps here, but typically, if I was going to do a heavy deadlift variation, my second lower body exercise, because this is a lower body max effort session, so my second lower body exercise would typically be a single leg movement, and it takes it away from that kind of max strength stimulus being so similar, even if you're doing reps, because it can be damn fatiguing if you're doing up to a heavy single deadlift plus back offsets, and then going into like front squats for sets of like 8+, you'll be pretty cooked. And it's typically geared more towards strength sports when you're doing something like that, versus going, say if you're doing, for example, you did those deadlifts, going to some kind of single leg movement, less absolute loading, you get some of that unilateral work in, etc. So that's just a programming preference. Reverse hypers, this is a nice one to deload the lower back as well, so you can nail the glutes and the hammies and the erectors, but also at the bottom there, it deloads the lower back by pulling the spine under. So there's a couple of ways you can do it. You can do it like swinging like that, where the legs kind of swing up and down, you get a little bit more traction, or you can do it like controlled. So you kind of control it down, and then you squeeze your bum to bring the legs up, and then control it back down. Obviously, you can use less weight that way, but sometimes it can feel better. Sometimes if you swing too hard, it almost feels like you jam your lower back discs together. I've done that a few times, so just be aware of that. It can feel a little funny if you go too far with the arch. So it looks like we're doing twisting. Oh, back extension with twist, is it? Okay. Glute ham raise with twist. Interesting. Oh yeah, there we go. This is the back extension. full back extension, glute ham raise, and then twist. That's an interesting variation. I actually haven't seen that one before. So there's some cool things you can do with rotation, especially with hamstring exercises. So there's one I like to do where it's like a single leg isometric hamstring. So it'll be like in this position right here, but with one leg, you hold that and you can rapidly rotate. It's a nice one because the hamstrings don't just perform hip extension and knee extension. There is a little bit of rotation in there, so it can help, quote unquote, bulletproof around different things. Glute ham raise rotation, that's a pretty interesting exercise. I should give that a go. Similar concept around what I'm talking about now. You can also do back extension, so just the hip portion with the rotation as well for the lower back too. So yeah, it's a cool little accessory movement, that one. And then we have these rotational kettlebell swings. So yeah, these are pretty popular now, I think, especially around striking arts. I quite like it. I think it takes you out of the typical up and down, forward and back that you kind of get stuck in with certain programs, especially if you are doing a program that's powerlifting or bodybuilding bias. It's always up and down. It's always front and back. Having this biases the hip. It turns the hip. I'm not going to say it can potentially transfer to punch, etc. like that, but it's closer to the demands that you're going to have in MMA and boxing than it is just the kettlebell swing. That doesn't mean that the other stuff is useless. It just means this could be a more quote-unquote specific variation you could work into your training. So you might be further away from a fight, you might be doing a traditional kettlebell swing, and then maybe as you get close to a fight, you might be doing something like this as part of your more specific preparation. Obviously, it kind of depends how you feel when you do it. Do you feel like it helps you? Does it feel like it helps you kind of sit down your punches, etc.? If it does, perfect. If it doesn't, hey, maybe there's something else you can do. But this is a nice variation. Yeah.
All right, there it is. That's a wrap.
That's it for the session. So yeah, just to wrap that up, a lot of Westside influence. I'm not a huge, let me say when I'm not a huge fan of Westside. I'm not a huge fan of this idea of max effort days, repetition days, diamond days for athletes. Now, what I do like, what Phil takes from Westside, is the idea of conjugate training. And that's kind of, I don't know, I don't think it was born out of Westside, but it was definitely made popular out of Westside. And people kind of get confused and they'll typically ask, what do you think about conjugate training for, MMA, combat athletes, whatever. Conjugate training is exactly what I teach and preach on this channel, podcast, articles, everything. I just don't call it conjugate. Conjugate training is just training all qualities at all times. And I've talked about that often in these videos, about never straying away too far from the qualities that you need for your sport. And combat sports being mixed sports, like a lot of team sports are, you always have a thread of speed, strength, power, sometimes some kind of bodybuilding work, because it depends if you need the muscle mass, aerobic, anaerobic conditioning, mobility, whatever else. You need a thread of all of that through your training all the time. You may just have various emphasis throughout the year, depending on where you are. So yes, I do like that Phil takes that concept into his training. Yeah, and there were some interesting exercises in this as well that you could potentially take from here as part of your accessories to give you a little more variation. If you get bored with some of the same training over and over, some of these are good to add in. You can also play with some of these as kind of progressions. So you could go glute ham raise at one point, then the next cycle you could do that glute ham raise with twist. Same thing with the kettlebell swing into that rotational kettlebell swing. Yeah, so there's some good stuff in there too. So make sure you stay tuned. Actually, what I'll do, if you like this video at all, if there's any other videos from Phil Daru or from anyone else that you want me to break down, just throw them down. Let me know in the comments which ones in particular, because that always means that I'm not trying to search for ones that you guys will like. So I've got a few more that I'll break down that were requests, but I'll see you in a bit.